You're sitting in a meeting. You've just shared an idea you spent the entire week preparing, when suddenly a colleague cuts you off with a sarcastic remark that brings the room to a halt. It's not the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. At work, in your family, or out in the world, you will always encounter people who thrive on disrespect. They enjoy manipulating your emotions, provoking anger, then stepping back to watch as if they're innocent. But that doesn't mean you have to play by their rules. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to respond with weak silence, but with the silence of someone who knows they're stronger. You don't need to shout. You don't need to overreact. You just need one well-timed, well-chosen response. Then walk away calmly, leaving the rude person to stew in their own confusion. In this video, I'll share with you how to respond wisely, quietly, yet with power when someone disrespects you. And trust me, they'll never forget that moment. 1. An emotionless response is a form of power. Imagine you're sitting in an important meeting. You've just shared an idea you spent an entire week developing, but as soon as you finish, a colleague smirks and sneers. Great. If we're planning to go back a few years. The room falls silent. A few awkward glances are exchanged. In that moment, every instinct of self-defense in you is triggered. You feel your face flush, your palms sweat, your mind scanning dozens of sharp comebacks. And yet, you do nothing. You simply look them in the eye, nod slightly and say, "You're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled not to care." Then you turn to someone else and continue the discussion as if nothing happened. In that room, you are the only one who remains composed. An emotionless response doesn't mean apathy or weakness. It is a form of power, the power of one who remains sovereign while others lose themselves. When someone rude provokes you, they're not truly seeking a debate or a solution. They want to drag you into their game, a game where whoever loses their temper first loses. Because when you get angry, you surrender your reason, and once you lose reason, you say things you shouldn't, do things you'll regret, not because you are insulted, but because you let someone else define your emotions. Stoic philosophy teaches you cannot control others, but you can always control yourself. A rude person may use words to try to diminish you, but it's your response that determines whether they succeed. If you lash out, argue, or lose your composure, you've handed them exactly what they wanted: control over your emotions. But if you stay calm, respond with clarity, or even say nothing, you've reclaimed all your power. An emotionless response doesn't mean passively enduring disrespect. Sometimes, all it takes is one short, neutral, but weighty sentence to extinguish the flame someone is trying to ignite. Like when someone insults you and you respond, "Thanks, I'll consider that." It neither agrees nor denies, but it halts their momentum, because they can't pull you into the emotional territory they're trying to dominate. In reality, rude people aren't as strong as they pretend to be. They don't use reason, they use volume. They don't offer sincerity, they wield sarcasm. They don't seek to understand you, they want you to lose control. Once you understand this, you'll realize that what frightens them most isn't your louder voice, it's your lack of reaction. Your calmness becomes a mirror that reflects their chaos back at them, leaving them confused, unsettled, even afraid. Self-control is one of the highest expressions of personal strength. You may be skilled and talented, but if others can easily trigger your emotions, you're living in a world shaped by them. But once you master your own response, you are no longer manipulated. Each time you remain composed, you send a clear message: I'm not playing this game. And when you refuse to play, the game ends. A Stoic is not someone who lacks emotion, but someone who chooses how to respond to emotion with intention. And in a world where everyone rushes to react, an emotionless response is what makes you stand out. It's clarity, dignity, and proof that you don't just control the situation, you control yourself, and that nothing is more powerful. 2. When you respond to chaos with calm, you gain the upper hand. In a world where everyone is shouting to be right, the one who remains calm is the one in control. Many mistake silence for weakness, composure for defeat, but in truth, nothing is stronger than facing chaos with an unshaken mind. When others try to provoke you, to drag you into a confrontation, and you maintain a steady face, unwavering eyes, and a clear voice, you've already disoriented them. They expect a reaction. Instead, you quietly reflect their chaos back to them with depth, not noise. I still remember being on a team project where one member had a habit of dismissing others' ideas. He wouldn't let you finish a sentence before shaking his head or mocking you. That time I presented a carefully prepared solution, but halfway through he cut in. "Forget it, just another dreamer's idea." The room fell silent. For a split second, I felt my heart race, but I also recalled this. A Stoic doesn't react by instinct, they respond with reason. I took a deep breath, looked him in the eye, and said, "I don't argue with those unwilling to listen." Then I returned to my presentation, unrushed. He didn't speak again, and the team began to see me differently. I didn't win because I was right. I won because I stayed composed when others didn't. Calmness isn't a weapon to attack with. It's a shield that renders outside aggression powerless. Those who are aggressive, rude, or sarcastic aren't truly strong. They manufacture chaos to hide the emptiness within. They speak loudly, interrupt, try to seem clever. But what they fear most is being ignored. And when you deny them the reaction they want, when you don't get angry, don't argue, don't stoop to their level, you throw them off balance, you strip them of control, and in the game they designed, they lose first. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to ignore all insults. It teaches you to choose what's worth responding to. Calmness is a choice. It comes from understanding that emotional reactions only fuel the fire, while reason puts it out at the source. When someone provokes you, there's no need to teach them a lesson right then. Your refusal to be dragged into their chaos is lesson enough. Serene silence is the sharpest reply in a noisy world. It needs no harsh tone, no lofty words, only your steadiness while others waver. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Let others shout. You keep your soul still like a lake on a windless day. And in that stillness, you lead. Others may argue endlessly, insult you, try to drag you down, but if you remain unshaken, their contempt loses all meaning. They're merely exposing their own loss of control. Dominance in a confrontation isn't won with the final word. It's won when the other realizes they can't shake you. And you don't achieve that by overpowering them, but by standing firm. Calmness isn't surrender, it's a silent declaration. I've risen above this game. And that is the highest victory anyone can attain in the face of chaos. 3. Gentle contempt cuts deeper than anger. Most of us have believed that when someone insults us, the only way to fight back is through anger. That we must strike hard, speak louder, and put them in their place to stop them from ever doing it again. But in truth, anger wounds us more than it wounds others. It's like gripping a burning coal to throw at someone. You're the one who gets burned first. Meanwhile, gentle contempt without shouting, without arguing, can leave the offender more humiliated than any emotional counterattack. Because you show them they're not even worth your anger, and that alone hits directly at their ego. There's a saying that sounds like a joke. If I had $1 for every smart thing you've said, I'd still be broke. It sounds mild, even humorous, but anyone who's heard it knows. It doesn't need harsh words to be cutting. It doesn't call anyone stupid, doesn't curse, doesn't attack directly, yet it reveals a truth the other person can't deny. And when you deliver it with perfect calm, no frown, no raised voice, just a slight smirk and steady eyes, the impact far outweighs any emotional outburst. Why is that? Because anger still shows that you care. When you lash out, react strongly, the other person sees they've gotten to you. But when you respond with a calm, emotionless remark that still pierces through their pride, you've won the battle without even stepping into the arena. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't need to sound sharp. They just made it clear that the attack wasn't worth sacrificing their inner peace. In real life, you'll meet people who assert their intelligence through words, who use sarcasm to impose superiority. But when you respond with a line like, "If I believed you were right, I would have been wrong from the start," there's nothing left for them to say. Your reaction falls outside the script they prepared. They expected rage, pushback, a shouting match, but instead, you meet them with refined disdain. Your composure leaves them unsettled. What they thought was a sharp insult becomes just noise bouncing off a wall too solid to break through. I once witnessed a friend use exactly this calm to handle someone who always tried to act like the smartest in the room. During a team meeting, as he presented his idea, that guy interrupted with a mocking laugh. "Sounds fun. If we were still living in 2005. People laughed, not because it was funny, but because they were used to siding with the loudest voice. But instead of getting angry or firing back, my friend simply smiled and said, "With the value of your input, I'm surprised we haven't slipped back to 1990. No one said anything after that. The man flushed red, and the discussion moved forward without another disruption. In that moment, everyone understood who was actually in control of the room. Gentle contempt doesn't stem from cruelty. It stems from self-control. It's a quiet declaration that you don't need to fight every rude person out there. You only need to show them they're not worth your energy. They may be loud, but you hold the weight of stillness. They may criticize, but you don't need to prove anything. And that silence, intentional, deliberate silence, is what leaves them most disturbed. In Stoicism, victory doesn't come from defeating others with words, but from remaining intact while others unravel. And no reaction is more powerful than showing, "I see what you're doing, but I won't engage. You're harming yourself without my help, and in that game, you lost before it began." 4. Not everyone deserves your response. Not every word is worth your attention. Not every conversation requires your presence. And more importantly, not everyone who offers criticism deserves a reply. This isn't arrogance. It's a deliberate choice made by someone who knows the value of their time, energy, and inner peace. One of Stoicism's deepest lessons is learning to distinguish what deserves a response and what should be ignored. Because when you respond to everything, you let others control your emotional life instead of governing it yourself. There's a kind of person who appears in your life solely to stir conflict. They're not here to understand, to contribute, or to exchange ideas. They're here to provoke, to disrupt, to prove they're above you in any way they can. These people aren't interested in truth, logic, or progress. They feed off the satisfaction of making others feel confused, angry, or inferior. So why respond? To prove you're right? to win a meaningless argument, or to hand them exactly what they crave. Control. Remember, your energy is finite. Every time you get angry, argue, or justify yourself to someone unworthy, you spend the most precious thing you have, your peace. You may be right, you may have reason, you may even hold the perfect argument. But if the other person has no intention of listening, your reply is no different than planting seeds in barren soil. It won't grow, it won't change anything, it will only exhaust you further. I learned this the hard way. In a team meeting, a new colleague dismissed every idea I proposed. He offered no alternatives, no real feedback, just subtle jabs like, "Seems like we're doing this for fun," because I don't see the effectiveness. At first, I wanted to respond, to explain every detail, to prove my plan was sound. But then I looked into his eyes. There was no curiosity, only challenge. That's when I realized this wasn't someone looking to understand, but someone looking to dismiss. So I smiled and said gently, "I think this conversation ended before it even began." Then I turned away and resumed my work, leaving him in awkward silence. The team saw clearly who was in control. I didn't need to shout or tear him down. I simply stepped away from a confrontation that had no value. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't let trivial things steal your inner peace." In practice, that means not every insult needs a rebuttal, not every debate deserves your voice. When you refuse to respond to rudeness or mockery, you quietly declare that the person in front of you isn't important enough to move you. And that is the most effective counter-punch you can deliver. Learn to choose wisely. Know who speaks from sincerity, who speaks from hurt, and who just speaks to speak. When you encounter someone who provokes conflict with no good faith, remember that silence can be the most resounding answer. You don't need to step into every ring someone tries to drag you into. They may want to fight, but if you don't agree to the match, it never begins. Not responding doesn't make you weak. On the contrary, it's the mark of someone who has risen above emotional reflexes. It's someone who understands. Not everyone is worthy of a reply. And the calm you maintain is your way of saying, you know your worth, and you won't let anyone else define it. 5. Sometimes a painful truth must be spoken. Silence carries its own power. But there are moments when a clear, honest statement is what truly awakens someone. Not a line meant to humiliate or retaliate, but a timely response, gentle enough to avoid shaming, yet honest enough to confront what they've been avoiding. Sometimes you don't need to shout to make an impact. You only need to say something true and direct enough to force the other person to face the limits of their own perception and behavior. This isn't revenge. It's a moment of clarity. A reminder that if they're self-aware enough, they'll one day thank you for. In the workplace, or any relationship, there's no shortage of people who thrive on rudeness. They believe that criticizing, mocking, and acting superior is a sign of strength. They wear the label straightforward to mask their harshness and convince themselves that they're just being realistic. But reality doesn't reward those who lack respect. You might be heard, but you'll never be truly listened to. You might grab attention, but you'll lose credibility. And eventually, if no one stops to speak the truth to them, they'll stray too far into delusion without realizing their path ends in a dead end. I remember a time when a colleague constantly presented himself as someone who knew everything. In meetings, he never offered constructive feedback. He simply waited to point out flaws in others, not to help them improve, but to assert his own status. One day, he harshly dismissed a new member's idea with a half-joking, half-condescending tone. "Sounds great, if we're playing make-believe." Everyone fell silent, unsure how to react, but I didn't hesitate. I looked him in the eye and said, not harshly, not with anger, "That attitude won't take you far in life." He forced a smile, but from that day the tone of our meetings changed. He spoke less, and when he did, he was more measured. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I wanted him to see how he was sabotaging his own opportunities without even knowing it. That statement wasn't just for him. It was a reminder for all of us. That disrespect is not a personality trait, that bluntness doesn't equal rudeness, and that constantly making others feel small doesn't make you bigger. Some people spend their lives under the illusion that coldness, hostility, and abrasiveness are signs of strength. But those qualities only push them further from real opportunities. They're excluded from AAQ groups, passed over in serious discussions, not because they lack ability, but because no one wants to work with someone who wounds others to feed their ego. Stoic philosophy doesn't promote total softness. It encourages clarity and courage, especially when the truth can help someone improve. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." But when the time comes to speak, say what is right. And often what is right is hardest to hear. Not everyone will accept the truth immediately. They may dismiss it, rationalize it, even lash out at you. But in time, if you spoke calmly, with clear intent, not from resentment, but from insight, that seed will grow. Because sometimes, an uncomfortable truth is the only thing that can save someone from the pride that's holding them back. And in those moments, speaking that truth is not anger. It's an act of courage and compassion. You don't have to say much. You just have to say what's right. 6. Forgetting is the gentlest form of rejection. When someone disrespects you, your instinct is often to react. You want to say something smart, sharp, even cutting, to prove they were wrong, to make them regret it. But the truth is, not every insult deserves a response, and not every clash is worth your emotional investment. In many cases, the strongest rejection is simply to brush it off, or better yet, to forget it entirely. Because when you forget something, you deny it any power in your mind. And that is a subtle, yet deeply effective counter. Picture a colleague who constantly tries to seem clever by putting others down. In a meeting, after you share an idea you've worked hard on, he squints, smirks, and says sarcastically, "Creative idea, if we're aiming to fail." People laugh out of discomfort. You feel thrown off. Everyone turns to you waiting for a reaction. In that moment, you may want to fire back, expose him, prove you're not easily shaken. But instead you meet his gaze, smile lightly and say, "Thanks for the input. I'll be sure to forget it right away." Then return to your point. Short, emotionless, without spite or provocation, yet the impact is lasting. When you say you'll forget their words, it doesn't mean you're avoiding the truth. It means you're refusing to let those words take residence in your mind. You're setting a quiet boundary. I heard it, but I won't carry it. That makes it clear they no longer have influence over you. They tried to shake your composure, but instead they're left empty, because they didn't get the emotional reaction they expected. And that emptiness is the price they pay for their disrespect. Stoicism teaches more than outward calm. It demands true stillness of the mind. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens that upsets us, but our judgment about what happens." In other words, it's not the comment that hurts. It's your decision to replay it, analyze it, respond to it, and let it linger in your thoughts. That's why, instead of a dramatic reaction, a quiet, "I'll forget it right away," becomes a powerful refusal. You're not agreeing. You're not arguing. You're simply refusing to let their words exist in your inner world. Forgetting in this context isn't carelessness, it's an intentional choice. It's a form of rejection, not through words but through controlled indifference. A Stoic doesn't avoid emotion. They refuse to surrender control of their emotions to others. And forgetting is one of the clearest signs of such mastery. When you don't let meaningless things occupy space in your mind, you make room for what truly matters: peace, focus, and self-respect. Many think forgetting is weakness, that you let things go because you fear confrontation. But in truth, it takes great strength to ignore something that was meant to hurt you. You need confidence, maturity, and calm to let go instead of holding on. And once you master that, no one can manipulate you with words again. They retreat, not because you beat them, but because they can't reach you. And in a world full of noise and drama, sometimes forgetting is the clearest expression of power you can offer. 7. Let them see they're making a fool of themselves. One of the most common mistakes when dealing with rude people is thinking you have to strike back to restore fairness. You believe that if you don't respond, if you don't teach them a lesson, you're giving up power. But the truth is the opposite. Rude people don't need you to do anything to lower themselves. They're already doing it every time they interrupt, every time they mock, every time they raise their voice, just to drown out others. Your job isn't to expose them through argument, but simply to hold up the mirror so they can see how they're behaving. And when they realize it, or when those around them do, you won't need to say another word. They've already made a spectacle of themselves. Sometimes it only takes a sentence like, "You seem deeply committed to making yourself look ridiculous." It sounds humorous, but it's a razor-sharp remark. It's not a crude insult. It simply points out the truth everyone else sees but hasn't said. And the truth, when spoken calmly and at the right moment, is far more disarming than any harsh criticism. Not because it wounds, but because it forces someone to confront what they've been avoiding, how they appear through the eyes of others. I once witnessed a classic case during a group project. One member constantly tried to sound clever, yet never contributed anything of substance. Every time someone spoke, he'd chime in with mocking comments like, "Wow, that sounds like a freshman's presentation." No one responded, partly out of discomfort, partly to avoid escalation. Until one day, after yet another snide remark during a meeting, one of my more composed colleagues simply said, "You seem very committed to becoming a walking example of immaturity." The room fell silent. No one laughed. The man was visibly unsettled. And strangely enough, from that day forward, his tone changed. Not because he was humiliated, but because he realized people were seeing through the confident mask he was hiding behind. In Stoic philosophy, you don't expose foolishness with rage or mockery. Sometimes, your calm presence, your emotionless honesty, is what makes someone most uncomfortable. When you speak the truth while the other is trying to create chaos, the contrast in behavior becomes so stark that judgment is no longer needed. A wise person doesn't win by out-talking others. They win by making others see the absurdity of their own actions. Foolishness doesn't come from being quirky. It comes from trying to appear superior in an uncontrolled way. These people rarely realize they're pushing others away, crafting an image completely opposite of what they intended. But when you calmly name what they're truly projecting, you create a moment of reckoning. You don't emphasize their mistake. You highlight the truth they've been trying to ignore. And in that moment, if they're awake enough, they go quiet, not because you won, but because they have nowhere left to hide. A sharp remark doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true. The right timing, the right tone, and the right truth. When you choose to show someone they're making a fool of themselves, you're not just protecting your boundaries, you're sending a clear message to those around you. I don't insult others, but I won't accept being insulted either. And that's a quiet kind of strength no one can ignore. 8. Well-timed silence is the harshest blow to a fighter. In any argument, the aggressor wants one thing: a reaction. They want you angry. They want you to fire back. They want you to step onto the battlefield they've prepared. Because there, they feel powerful. They thrive on conflict, and without your response, their game can't begin. But when you refuse to react, when you stay silent at the right moment, you don't just withdraw from the fight. You disarm them of their strongest weapon, your attention. Stoics understand that silence isn't evasion, it's an intentional act. It's a choice made by someone who controls their emotions and the situation. When someone insults you, mocks you in front of others, and you simply look at them calmly, then turn away as if their words don't exist, that silence carries more weight than any rebuttal. In their eyes, your silence isn't weakness, it's controlled indifference. You've deemed them too insignificant to warrant a response. Some say silence makes you look weak. But in truth, rude and aggressive people fear silence most, because they can't control it. They can provoke anger, they know how to escalate it, they can argue with resistance, but with silence, they have nothing to manipulate. They throw out an insult and are met with emptiness. And that emptiness forces them to face a truth they didn't want to see. They just wasted time, energy, and dignity attacking someone who doesn't care. I once sat in a meeting where someone loudly attacked me for no clear reason. He made it personal, hoping I'd react and turn the meeting into a drama. But I just sat there, hands clasped, eyes on my notes, not saying a word. When he finished and waited for my response and got none, the tone in the room shifted. People began looking at him with confusion, even discomfort. My silence made his words seem absurd to everyone, without me having to defend myself. And from that day on, he never tried that again. In Stoic teaching, no victory is greater than keeping your inner peace. And when someone tries to drag you into chaos, but you stand firm like a still lake untouched by wind, that silence is the sharpest reply. You don't need to shout to reclaim your power. You just need to withhold your attention. And in a world where everyone scrambles to have the last word, the person who knows when to stay silent says the most. I used to be the kind of person who reacted instantly when insulted. Just one sarcastic remark was enough to bother me all day. I'd even lose sleep thinking of comebacks I should have said. But later, as I came to understand Stoicism, I realized that well-timed silence or a calm response is actually the wisest reaction. You don't need to win every small exchange, because true victory is when you don't let others control your emotions. Ever since I learned to choose what deserves a response, life has felt lighter and my relationships have grown healthier. Not because I avoid conflict, but because I choose to reserve my energy for what truly matters, not to waste it on those who don't deserve it. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future updates. Thank you for listening. Keep living with calm, strength, and don't let anyone control your mind but yourself. See you in the next video.